Yes, I think we are ready to start now. Hello, everyone. I'm Mihai Ghiță, co-founder at Cypher. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us today in this webinar. This is the second Privacy Hub webinar of the year. 2 years ago, when GDPR came into force, nobody knew exactly what to expect and how to prepare for it. But since then, a lot of things have changed. So this is why today we invited guests from 4 countries to discuss what did we learn in these years, what were and what are the challenges faced by businesses in the Central and Eastern Europe when implementing GDPR. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to today's panelists. Angela Mitropoulos is an attorney and she's a co-founder of GDPR company in Athens from Greece. Coming from Bulgaria, we have Slana Toneva, legal advisor, data protection and privacy expert. From Hungary, Budapest, welcome Balint Halas, who is a partner at Bird & Bird, and he is advising on intellectual property information technology and privacy and data protection matters. And last but not the least, from Romania, we are happy to be joined by Radu Ionescu, who is managing partner at Ionescu and Sava. I also want to introduce the moderator of this discussion, Cristiana Deca. She's a data protection specialist at Decalex. And before passing the stage to them, there is one more thing to mention. If you are not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, when you move the mouse, you can see a Q&A button. Please click on it if you have questions for panelists, and we'll try to answer them as we go or at the Q&A session at the end. Okay, that being said, Cristiana, you have the stage. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again. I see a lot of our participants in the first edition. I want to thank the speakers for joining us. I know it's we are living some special times and everybody is struggling with what's happening. And that is why we decided that 25 months from 25 May, it's a good month to do an assessment of what has changed in the last 2 years when it comes to the DPO interactions. So in today's webinar, we are going to talk about 2 main themes: the role of the DPO 2018 versus 2020, and the DPO communication. On the first panel, we will address the speakers some questions and they will answer their point of view. So to begin, the first question is how did the DPO focus change in the last 2 years from an operational point of view? And I would like Ruslava to help us with an answer.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ruslana Toneva, and it's a pleasure for me to be part of this webinar. Okay, for the first topic, how did the focus of the GDPR change during these 2 years? Maybe I have to start with the fact that the new legal framework in the field of personal data protection came into force on the 25th of May 2018, as you all know. The General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is the most significant reform in the area of personal data and privacy in the past 2 decades. Well, the new General Data Protection Regulation introduces the figure of the so-called Data Protection Officer, or DPO. The Data Protection Officer is a staff member of the controller or of the processor, or a national person who is outside the controller or processor's organization, who has the task to provide advice in the area of personal data protection and to monitor compliance with the regulation in the organization. The DPO can be a member of staff, as I said, but he or she can also be an external person. In order to describe how did the DPO's focus has changed from an operational point of view in the past 2 years in Bulgaria, I will first describe the obstacles we have met during these 2 years. And after that, I will talk about the tasks of the GPO according to Article 39 of the regulation and the change of focus of its performance. In the very beginning of coming the regulation into force, the GPO in Bulgaria was a figure whose functions and duties, unfortunately, were unknown. Maybe the situation was the same with another member states. And when talking about the role of the GPO in Bulgaria, according to the annual reports for 2018 and 2019 of the Commission of Personal Data Protection of Bulgaria, there is a stable tendency of inquiries about the role and functions of GPO and the legal requirement of designating a GPO. It's obvious that administrators and processors aren't still aware of the role of the GPO. The good news is that the Commission of Personal Data Protection of Bulgaria conducted a national information and awareness campaign. And the campaign was related to GDPR, which was helpful for administrators and processors from both public and private sector as well. Comparing the role of the GPO in 2018 versus 2020, I think that now the vast majority of data protection administrators and processors are looking for our services. They know what our duties are and they are looking for our services. And up to the present, more than 4,000 administrators and processors have declared before the Data Protection Commission of Bulgaria that they have designated the GPO. Well, another obstacle for the GPOs in Bulgaria came with the promulgation of the law for amendment and supplementation of the National Personal Data Protection Act. It happened on the 26th of February 2019. As we all know, the regulation came into force the previous year. And the late promulgation of the Bulgarian domestic law changed the focus to keeping in mind the derogations on national legislation. Also, the GPOs were obliged to inform and advise the controllers and processors of changing their protection policies in accordance with the domestic rules that are built on the specific clauses. The law provides that the Bulgarian Commission for Personal Data Protection should be notified for the appointment of the GPO. Their name, identification number, and contact details, as it has a register where the administrators and the processors with the GPO they have chosen is filled in. From my point of view, there could be specified several changes of the focus of the GPO during these 2 years, having in mind our tasks according to Article 39 of the regulation. First, the performance of the task to inform and advise the controller or the processor and the employees who carry out processing of their obligations pursuant to the regulation has definitely changed and has evolved. From the very beginning of coming the regulation into force, the GPOs had to advise the administrators and the processors on how to implement all the new obligations. Well, as a DPO, I can tell you now that in the very beginning, I was frequently visiting the administrators, the processors for initial audit on place and so-called data mapping. After that, I went to the administrators and to the processors to perform um, the training, the initial training. Well, now the situation is different. Most of the administrators and processors have basic knowledge on GDPR, and they're able to easily understand their obligations. Something more, COVID-19 pandemic changed the scene, and most of our trainings, for example, became remote. Also, we found different ways to successfully fulfill our duties during this pandemic.
Ruslana,
Yes.
thank you for your, can you hear me?
Yes.
As a conclusion, I see that in Bulgaria, as in Romania, a lot of changed actually in the past 2 years.
Yes,
which is good to see. Unfortunately, I think we do not have enough time to debate this subject. And if you don't mind, you can make a conclusion so we can skip to the next question.
Okay, I will. Yes, I will.
Okay.
Well, as a whole, the performance of the duties of the data protection officer has definitely evolved. But we can sum up that from an operational point of view, the DPO's focus has changed as we learned to be more flexible and we apply more efficient methods for ensuring compliance with the regulation.
Thank you, Ruslana. Very interesting. I think similar stuff are happening in the member states, as we have seen actually yesterday in the report from the European Commission. Moving on to the next question. Because a lot of stuff have changed in the DPO's interaction in the last 2 years, I would like to ask Balint if there is a potential conflict of interest of the DPO with other function, and how did he manage it in Hungary?
Thank you very much. Well, the short answer is that it's complicated as life, as usual. But before I elaborate on that one, I would like to thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I really encourage all of the participants to submit questions to the Q&A and maybe also to the chat. We will try to address those questions or topics either during this webinar or after. We will pick them up after the webinar. So this conflict of interest is very interesting. It has 2 dimensions, I guess. The first dimension is in itself GDPR, and it emerges when the DPO is provided by as an internal function, so as an internal DPO. And the other dimension is not necessarily, striking for all organizations, but if it's an external DPO, and especially if it's a law firm or legal advisor, then it might emerge a conflict between DPO support or DPO functions and legal advice. So let's start with the internal DPO conflict and what's imminent in the GDPR is. So I guess that for organizations which are larger and had different functions within the management and the legal and compliance, etc., and especially those organizations who already had bricks and mortar business, it was a little bit easier to set up the DPO function as required by the GDPR. What I'm talking about? I'm talking about the function that if you have a look at the GDPR, then basically the function of the DPO is to stand up for the rights of data subjects. And when I mean data subjects, it can be employees, it can be customers, it can be business partners, etc. If you look at the other angle, then you will see that if the organization sets up a function, then they would expect, and the company or organization would expect that that function, considers the interests of the organization. So if you take two maybe sets, then you will see that on the one hand there is the interest of data subjects, which is addressed by the GDPR, and on the other is the interest of the organizations and the business. And I think that the biggest challenge for a DPO was how to find a compromise or an intersection of these sets. And when I was preparing for this meeting, I think that I might have found, a good summary about that. So if you want to put this together and also as a DPO also function as required by the GDPR, but also provide meaningful support to the business, then you have to find this intersection and put all of the issues into that intersection. So what I'm talking about, it's a little bit easier to see from the interest of data subjects, because you will see that these kind of messages like we take your privacy seriously, you remain control in your data, etc. That is something where it seems that you can find this kind of interplay or this intersection. The other side is, the organizational side is, I think that, for example, requirements by the management, so avoid fines, or at least avoid high fines, avoid reputation loss, and also to set up a business, or set up a business strategy which pursue a legitimate interest, a legitimate business, which is meaning that you are not how to say acting in the black market with the data, etc. But what you are actually doing can be compliant with the GDPR. So it has a valid legal basis. There were legitimate interest assessments carried out, etc. So I think that this kind of internal conflict within an organization, is that how to find this kind of compromise, so standing up for the data subjects, and also on the other side not to play this getting in the way of things character for the management. Because if the DPO does not find this kind of compromise, or does not have the good interpersonal skills, or on the other hand, the management organization did not invest into bringing up this role to the required level, then the DPO might find himself or herself at the end of the corridor, not involved into decisions, etc., etc.
Balin?
Yep.
What do we do in the case of small companies? I think it's the same case everywhere, in every member state, when they do not have enough resources to have a DPO, a full-time DPO, and they tend to have a part-time DPO, somebody else in the company that it's already doing other stuff. How do we determine there if there's a conflict of interest or not?
Yes, very good question, and this leads us to the other aspects, the other dimension which I mentioned. If a company, especially SME, outsources the DPO functions to an external DPO, and it can be a dedicated DPO service to an advisory firm, for example, which is a little bit easier, to avoid this kind of conflict, but it's not absolutely clear, because the company might, seek advice which is not really related to the DPO function, but it's sort of legal advice. So, for example, that they realize that there is some issue with the legal basis or with the consent of data subjects, and they ask the DPO that, okay, we understand that maybe the consent was not valid, but still we would like to continue because it's a very important data set for us. So what are the, how to say, the risk of this kind of non-compliance, and how can we avoid being spotted by the supervisory authority? And this is where I think it's not a DPO service anymore, that's legal advice to the company. And you know, that kind of problem is basically a daily, you know, struggle for advisory firms, for DPO advisory firms. And on the other hand, it is also, you know, a sort of conflict for law firms. So for example, for me, I also have a couple of clients which either seek a support to their DPO, so the bigger organization, or we are the DPO. And with latter, it's extremely challenging to make a distinction between legal advice and DPO services, because it gets often mixed. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and how do you manage this?
Well, it's a little bit hard. It needs an honest conversation with your client, and making it very clear that if you would like me to be your external DPO, then these are what I can do and these are what I can't do. At myself, I don't really, you know, prefer to be an external DPO. I would like to remain in the legal advisor, also covering DPO, you know, functions, or DPO support functions, I would phrase this way. And for example, in Hungary, the Advocacy Act also requires lawyers to make this kind of distinctions. So we can be an external DPO, but we can do this as a, you know, attorney at law. So we cannot do this in the framework of our attorney services. And I guess this resembles to the GDPR's interpretation, and with a lot of interpretation, with a lot of, how to say, bar associations interpretation in various member states, because I also recall conversations within Bird and Bird, if Bird and Bird should provide these external DPO services or not, if yes, that in what kind of organization structure. And the end of the conversation was that Bird and Bird set up a different company for DPO services, and if a client would like us to be the external DPO, then we do this through this how to say, affiliate, I would say.
Thank you, Balint. A last question from me, at least. I would like to know if you have a similar situation like ours. In Romania, we have a standard from the workforce ministry that qualifies an internal DPO and gives the task to the internal DPO. The problem in Romania with the standard for the DPO is that it's not his position is not as a management position, but as an employee, a simple employee, which is actually in conflict with what the GDPR says. What's the situation in Hungary?
We don't have this kind of different standards, so I think it is basically the GDPR which needs to be considered. And I guess that in Hungary you can provide you know, enough how to say, powers even to an employee, and a sort of independence to the employee in the bylaws of a company, for example. So you can set up a similar role as a compliance officer, you know, whose task is basically to be there and, you know, raise the hand and push the red button if the management would like to do something that is not compliant. The issue is rather, and this leads back us to the, you know, the scale of the company or the maturity of the company, that if it's a small company, especially, you know, based on IT stuff, then it does not have this kind of experience with different roles. They don't have resources, they don't have this kind of sophisticated management, etc. And that can lead to different, you know, how to say, challenges, yeah, I would say.
Thank you, Balint, for your intervention. Moving on from the conflict of interest, I would like to address Angela. What has changed when it comes to the DPO interaction with the internal teams? Because as we know, there have been some shifts in this area in the last two years.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you all for being a part of this panel. It's really very interesting, and I'm honored. And I would like to say that I totally agree with Balint, what he said. I would like to complete that in Greece, always happens the opposite. I mean, you hire an attorney at law and you use him or her as a DPO. It's very common. So moving on to next question, what has changed when it comes to interaction with the teams? From my experience as a DPO in Greece, in Greek market enterprises, I would like to be realistic on that. And the reality is that in most of the cases, what has changed? Absolutely nothing. Most of the companies, I believe it's my opinion and from my experience when it comes to the teams of an enterprise. So from my experience in Greece, as an external DPO in public and private sector, not only DPOs, but the whole idea of compliance with GDPR is not so welcome in the teams of work, in the enterprises, at least most of them. So GDPR and the DPO position has until now, I believe, failed to become the new hot place in the company environment, a place that everybody would want to go, would want to move. I believe it has to do with the fact that employers do not have not put any credit in that position, unfortunately. In Greece, the salaries are low. They don't pay high salaries for being a DPO in a company. So the prestige of that position, of a DPO, of becoming a DPO in a company is low, taken under consideration that you have to have a training part before you become a DPO. So someone, employee or employer, has to invest on that. Another factor in Greece is that people believe that GDPR compliance puts obstacles and causes more problems than it solves. They see it as something that keeps work behind from what they want to do, the real work. So unfortunately, until now, I don't see much progress on that section, on every day's work of the teams. Employees are skeptical.
Do you think that this is a problem because we, being in a way, we are much alike Romanians in Greece? Do you think it has something to do with the lack of privacy culture?
Yes, and I will go to this item in my next answer, which is privacy culture vs mandatory enforcement. I believe I can sum it up there. But for now, I'm only testifying what I've seen in my experience, and I'm not that happy by what's happening. Speaking for Greece, employees are skeptical of that matter and on all the new actions and tasks they have to take, which brings them more paperwork. In Greece, we have managed to make a new bureaucracy around GDPR, especially in public sector. The last update due to COVID-19, the health protocols, should enforce a new interest for privacy and the GDPR compliance, which is really crucial. But until now, we haven't seen much progress on that. Maybe it's a little early. And I am one of the people that believe that if anything good could potentially come out of this pandemic is the awareness for data protection. especially within public sector, they handle GDPR compliance as another boring formality, which pumps up the paperwork. In legal entities of the public sector, they usually appoint an employee with poor skills on legal or business or IT matters. So I would go to the question that let's see what should have been changed to interaction with the teams. And
Angela, we can't hear you. The microphone is off. Yeah.
well, I was saying that we should see what the real question is, what should have been changed to interaction with the teams. And that is what we were waiting before May of 2018. So first of all, I believe employees in working teams should be more confident in what they are doing than before. I mean, that's the point. Their office life should be more easy, less complicated, because now there are policies and SOPs to guide them on how to handle files, electronic and natural records, emails, company sites, e-shops, company electronic magazines, we've seen that, etc. Also, employees and management teams should feel more confident, especially in companies and entities with a DPO. DPO should make them feel more confident. People should consult a DPO. That's what he or she is there for. Well, one of the multiple reasons, and feel safe in their everyday job. In my opinion, every company should appoint a DPO, whether it's mandatory or not. Ideally, I would like to see a DPO in every enterprise. It is highly recommended, even they are not obliged to, just as they appoint a legal advisor or an accountant. I also believe that people working in company teams should be motivated to gain better and more efficient knowledge of a certain item, which would be useful to company or to them in long term. It's another useful skill in their professional life.
Angela, what is the position of the Greece data protection authorities regarding DPO's function and position in companies?
They don't have much movement on that matter. They have adopted the guidelines, the 243 guidelines of the Working Party 29. I don't believe they have a lot of job on checking to enterprises. I mean, in my point of view, I believe they should have a checklist for companies and legal bodies, public sector, to check out which should and not, it does not have to have a DPO. They have released an opinion, an announcement recently about public sector, about the mandatory enforcement appointing of a DPO in public sector, and that's all. But the control, the check, has not become yet efficient.
Okay.
It was a year ago.
Do you want to make a conclusion so we can?
Okay. I would like to make a reference to the Irish DPC that reached out to DPOs across many sectors and established networks, public-private and not-for-profit, to garner on the job insights into their challenges and opportunities, the resources at their disposal, and the data protection issues that reoccur for them. What emerged from this engagement was a prevailing sense of disconnect between the role of DPO, as described in the GDPR, and its manifestation in reality, albeit a disconnect that may have its roots in misunderstanding. And many DPOs reported feeling isolated in their role, under-resourced, and solely accountable for their activities of the data controller. So as a conclusion to that, I believe that we could have done much better in Greece. I believe we should make more efforts to establish a new kind of working team. The privacy policy supporting team, or the DPO supporting team. And I would like to, I'm very interested to hear about other countries, what their data authority has done on that, or how enterprises confront this.
Thank you, Angela. Very interesting. I would say we are much alike when it comes to public sector.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the next topic, because we talked about the interaction with the teams. Now I wanna ask Radu, what has changed in the internal management of the data subjects requests in the last 2 years?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me here first. Very interesting points made by Angela. I would not start by saying the same thing, that nothing has really changed. In reality, there are a variety of types of evolution, if you wish, in terms of how organizations deal with subject access requests. First of all, these kind of requests are not new to GDPR. They existed before based on the directive, but truth is, in lack of fines and other pressure methods, let's say, organizations rarely took them seriously before. Initially, when the GDPR came into force, we were faced with a, it's a fashionable word now, with the first wave of subject access requests, which each organization handled as they knew best at that time. And the reality is that in our experience, none of the organizations that we've advised or that we work for handled such requests well. They either didn't look in all the places, they either didn't look at all the data they held, and most of them, if not all of them, had no idea where their information assets were held. So in terms of the evolution, I would say that we've seen organizations, particularly large ones, multinationals, banks, and so on, where this process has been carried out. They now have mapped their information assets, their data flow in the organization. So somehow the whole process is a bit more streamlined right now. But in fact, the most, let's say, the most efficient way to know if your organization is ready for subject access requests today would be to actually carry out a mock one. Ask someone from your team or some family member of your team to make a subject access request, knowing that some data of that person are in the organization, and analyze how the request is handled and answered. And you will see that many times you fail to look into emails properly. You forget that you have some backup copies of your data somewhere. And this is basically my first advice to clients or business partners that we advise when dealing with subject access requests or putting in place a process for the management of such requests. Another key issue that has changed, both Balint and Angela were talking about the shift in perspective regarding the role of the DPO. Basically in 2018, the main focus was on accountability. We all wanted to have the procedures in place to tick the boxes and show that we're let's say, compliant with GDPR. And the subject access request management procedure, whatever procedure each organization had in place, was just a copy-paste material that most of the organizations took from the web and so on. As the shift in the DPO role and general shift in the mindset regarding data protection goes from accountability to actual compliance, we've seen all these procedures throughout 2019 and even during this pandemic period when we had time to reflect on how our organizations are structured. We've seen those procedures actually adapted to the realities of each organization, because especially in large teams, it is impossible to find something off the web that will work for you in reality. Another shift that I've seen, or another evolution that we've seen, is an increased awareness of the teams with regard to what represents a subject access request. Most of large organizations will have a customer service arranged via email or even messenger system, and the staff answering those customer service systems, they were not trained to recognize such requests. I mean, if it wasn't worded so that it leaves no doubt to what it is, most such requests just passed unanswered for months until a bomb exploded down the road from the authority. And I think particularly in those organizations where accent was put on training and awareness, we've seen, if you wish, the reverse. Sometimes even questions like trivial questions like, I don't know, have you sent me the invoice or something like that? Is this a subject access request? Okay, let's take it easy. Not all of them are. Please.
Funny.
It is, and it's actually reality. On the other hand, what we've seen more and more, and actually I'm afraid we will continue to see an increased wave, is in very rare cases, subject access requests are legitimate or motivated by the legitimate interest of a person to actually know what the organization, what data a certain organization holds on that person. More and more such requests are motivated by, let's say, other purposes that the subject, data subject is pursuing. And we see this particularly in the area of employment relations. And we've had cases where clients had to settle labor cases that were absolutely unfounded requests from former employees for compensations and so on, which had no legal ground, but in the end they had to settle because of subject access requests either unanswered or answered improperly, or that, if answered, would result in various risk areas for the organizations. So more and more, these subject access requests are used as a pressure method to gain leverage in other area, whether it's commercial, customer relations, and so on. As a key takeaway after these 2 years, more than 2 years now, I would say that data minimization is the best way forward in dealing with subject access requests, because the less data you hold the easier it will be for the organization to answer to such requests. Then look at the policies, the procedures to answer such requests. Make sure that they are adequate to how the organization is structured, where the data assets are located, and who has access to them, how the data flows in the organization. So basically look at it and make sure it's tailored to you, because a bad suit would look bad on you at any day. And then awareness in the organization is key. Teach the organization to understand and report subject access requests, because they can come now through any channel. They can come through the Facebook messenger of the company. They can come through via telephone and so on. So an increased awareness in the organization to recognize and act quickly on such requests can help organizations avoid big problems down the road.
Thank you, Radu. Moving on to the next topic, and it relates actually to a question we are receiving from the public. What tools do you use in your activity as a daily DPO, and what part of the compliance process are they helping you with? And of course, is Excel one of your pals or a foe?
As Balint pointed out earlier, as a lawyer, I try to avoid as much as possible being appointed a DPO. Sometimes I get away with it, sometimes I don't. So I do have clients where we act as DPOs. We did not take the same route. We did not set up a separate organizations for that, but rather we built Chinese walls in the company, meaning that we appointed a certain lawyer who acts as a DPO and separated the legal advice functions. And that person who acts performs the DPO role in practice does not offer legal advice to that client. Our experience as a DPO per se is relatively limited for that particular reason. But of course, we advise a large number of DPOs from small to really large organizations in Romania. And yeah, the evolution of the tools is also an interesting one. Of course, we all started with Excel. At least I did. I don't know the rest of my colleagues, but I learned a long time ago that Excel is not a tool designed to edit text. It's a calculus tool. But unfortunately, this is the easiest or the most accessible, the most readily available tool that we have in order to put large quantities of data in tables. Word doesn't allow that. But basically, what I've seen is that most DPOs or most organizations have used these primary tools, pen and paper, Excel, which to me, pen and paper and Excel are basically the same thing when it comes to data protection. It's basically what Excel cannot ever help you do is to have permanent control over compliance, data protection compliance in your organizations. And this is where the tools really show their value to the organization.
Yes, sorry, Radu, let me interrupt just for a sec. So I absolutely agree. I still receive and also send Excel sheets containing data protection, processing, activity registers, data subject access requests, etc. And it's just a mess. So clearly Excel is not capable to set up processes and follow requests, etc. And that's where it leads the topic to more sophisticated platforms, I would say. And back to you.
Exactly. Thank you, buddy. So I strongly advocated to most of my clients getting one of the tools out there. There are a number of them. We use Cypher, which actually is a valuable tool in terms of starting with the mapping process. But then not only the mapping, which is, let's say, I hope it happened in 2018 in all organizations, but rather monitoring compliance and looking at or having continuous control over the compliance of the organizations. This type of tools, they're really of great value. This topic connects somehow with the shift in the role of the DPO. Basically, in 2018, everybody thought the DPO was supposed to do everything about data protection. It's his job to carry out impact assessments. It's his role to map everything. It's his role to carry out legitimate interest assessments and so on. So basically, he had to do it all. Well, the shift is now happening, where in fact the DPO should act as an advisor and not as a doer. Therefore, the DPO needs a tool to actually monitor the fact that the business owners, the persons responsible within the organizations for actually carrying out all these data protection activities, they actually do them. They actually perform those activities. They do them right. They do them on time, if we talk about subject access requests and so on. So I would strongly recommend to all my fellow colleagues out there who either work as a DPO or advise DPOs to investigate these tools. There are cases when, especially this is valid, especially for large organizations, multinationals have designed their own tools, which is also one way to go. But it's funny enough, just a day or 2 days ago, one of my clients who works in a huge company and has to use the internal systems asked me if I could recommend another system on the market, because what they have is entirely too complicated, and she cannot complete data processing records based on that tool, and she's afraid that she will face some consequences in relation to the authorities if she just uses the tool provided by the headquarters. So there are many options. Just look out there, search for one, and I'm sure you will find one that is suitable for your organization and for your needs.
Thank you, Radu. I think the conclusion is that the DPO is no longer the doer as it was supposed to be, which is very important from my point of view. Now we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, but we will answer it at the end of the panels. And moving on to the second panel, we will talk about the DPO communication. And I would like to ask Ruslana, how does she implement continuous privacy education in the companies she interacts with? Ruslana, can you hear us?
Yes, I do hear you. My colleagues' presentations were very interesting. As a matter of fact, I wanted to tell that the situation in Bulgaria is diametrically opposed, and the Bulgarian Data Protection Commission does something more, but it's not like that. Something more about our clients. In the Association of Data Protection Officers Bulgaria, we have maybe more than 60 clients, and something interesting is that one of them wanted to seize the contract with us because we sent them a lot of information, and we talk a lot to them, and they didn't have the human resource to implement all the things we tell them to do. And they told us that we are the GPO, so we are the people who have to do everything. So maybe in Bulgaria, GPO is still the doer, unfortunately. Well, when talking about the education, the continuous education in the company, it's very important topic because most of us know that data breaches, most of the data breaches are a result of an employee's mistake, or of an employee's, when an employee does not follow the technical or organizational measures for privacy. Something more. Every single administrator or a processor should follow, in my opinion, should follow a policy, an educational policy. As a DPO and in my practice, I do my best to train our clients and to explain them in plain language their obligations and duties in the field. Because we all know that GDPR is a complex, is a difficult matter, and the field is very difficult. And if you do not have the proper education, maybe it would be an extreme challenge for you. That's why when I make training programs, I try to explain in plain language to our clients what their duties are. For me, the education should start with an initial one, initial training. First of all, we should train all the employees of the organizations about the General Data Protection Regulation and about the main aspects of the regulation. And after that, we should carry on with the specific obligations of the different employees. Because, different employees have, of course, different tasks, and their tasks are connected with different data processing. That's why I think that a good way that we have chosen is to send our clients information, brochures, leaflets, and other information via email about the different obligations of the employees. I have conducted a lot of trainings, and I'm aware that only an initial training is not enough for the staff to comply with all the legal obligations in the field of data protection. As I told you earlier, during the initial education, the initial training program, I make an overview of the regulation. After that, I continue with telling every single employee his or her duties. You have to have in mind that when you're conducting a training program, it should be flexible, because it should be different for the different companies, for the different administrators. Yeah, it's impossible to train the people on the same way, because their data processing activities are different, their organizations are different. And you have to have this approach to know what the needs of the specific organization are, and to be flexible. Something more we do in our practice is that, as I told you, I'm part of an association of data protection officers, and we have we have an online platform. In this platform, we try to upload as much as possible information, and we make even scientific researches. We also upload brochures, templates, leaflets, all the information we think is necessary and could be helpful to the members of the associations and to our clients as well. Another thing I found helpful in my practice is, from my experience, it's very helpful, sending questionnaires to the clients. That's the way the data mapping process is made easier. The questionnaires I sent to the clients are very complex, and when they send them back, I have, as I can say that way, I have the big picture. I can understand all the data processing activities that are in the organizations and all the WAPs the organization has. And after looking at these field questionnaires, I'm more flexible and more useful to our clients, because, as I told you, I know where their labs are and where their cons are. We also have a communication platform, and our clients can ask their questions there. We also know that the best way to be GDPR compliant is to have a contact with your DPO. That's why we maintain this platform, and we try to communicate with our clients as much as possible. However, as I told you earlier, some of our clients say that we send them a lot of information. We call them a lot of times. That's why I try to sum the information up and not to bother them a lot. Finally, yes, just a conclusion. Finally, as part of the demonstrating compliance with general data protection regulation, the administrators and the processors need to document all the trainings that they have gone through. I think that I was helpful, and if you have any questions, you can ask me.
Thank you, Ruslana. Very interesting indeed. This topic with the training is still here an important one also in Romania. I would like to address the next question to Balint. Balint, what are the main challenges in communication with the senior management, and what has changed in this direction in the last 2 years from your perspective?
Difficult question again. I think it also resembles what Angela said about, you know, finding the right balance, and you know, she was a little bit maybe negative about saying that it's not a sexy job, let's phrase this way, to be a DPO, and it's also not a sexy position seen from organizations and management. And yes, I can relate to that one, but still I've seen good examples. So it really depends on companies and organizations and a management approach, because if they consider GDPR as not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, even if not a direct opportunity, but an indirect opportunity, saying that if we say that compliance with the GDPR is a selling point towards customers, for example, and hey, that's something that was basically the idea of the European Union with the GDPR, to create a sort of safe harbor, and saying that if your data is within the European Union, then it is in safe hands because the standard is really high. So if the management takes this view, then it's a little bit easier. If not, then it's challenging. And what Christina also said at the beginning, what you also said at the beginning, so there is a shift or a cascade of the different functions of the DPO. First, it was the interpretation of the GDPR. Then it was, setting up the administrative stacks, the registers, the processes, the protection impacts assessments, etc. And then there is a next one, which is more difficult and not so legal, I would phrase this way. I would call this as creating a culture at the company. And I mean the culture of compliance and the culture of respecting the rights and respecting privacy. It's basically making things happen in relation to the GDPR. And that's the, how to say, the step which sometimes is really, hard to make due to several reasons. Maybe the management is not supporting it. Maybe the personal skills of the DPO is not really capable of doing that one. And there is a next step, basically, when the DPO is considered as the part of the strategic planning of the company. And we've spoken about this new EC report, but if you just consider ownership of data, edtech, fintech, medtech, insurtech, legal tech, AI, IoT, e-privacy, etc., all of these new buzzwords. If you handle personal data and if you are not, just a bricks and mortar business, then you should include the strategic planning, or you should include data protection into your strategic planning. Because if you don't do, then you will, well, not fail, but you will not be able to compete with those competitors who do this exercise. And you can't do this if you skip the preceding steps, especially this creating culture. So that's what I'm trying, for example, to address to clients who seem to be reluctant to, understand that what is the ultimate goal of a DPO beyond just setting up the registers and responding the data subject access request.
Balint, we have a question, and I think it's somehow related to this topic. Which is the best way to approach the management team? You know that in companies, usually the DPO has a unique point of contact with the legal manager or the IT manager. But as it's stated in the GDPR, he's supposed to talk with the board from time to time. How do we get to the board?
I think that, well, I've seen good and bad examples here too. I think if the DPO appears towards the board and other business functions as a support function, so, and it again relates to the personal skills and not the professional skills of the legal skills or the IT skills, etc., which are still very important and required. So if the DPO appears as and makes it, clear in messages that, hey, I'm here to help you, let's start a discussion, I will try to find the solution which both serves the goals and is compliant with the GDPR. And it's very important to appear in this kind of supportive role, and not, you know, just somebody who always hits the brakes and just says that, no, you can't do this because it's not GDPR compliant. There is occasions when you have to do this, but still, if the DPO says that that's not possible, but these are the, you know, the possible workarounds or options how to do that one, it's again a, you know, a different how to say, role towards the management, because they will see that you are proactive and not just somebody who is you know, getting in the way of the business.
If I may jump in, Christiana. It's, if you wish, the DPO should be perceived as a business partner within the organizations, and I've seen that it works where sales and marketing in an organization work well together, then they will work well with the DPO. They don't work well together, then the DPO is somewhere, I don't know, in the basement office. So this is basically a matter that comes from the management and the organizational culture.
I would also have a question here.
So sorry, Mihai, just one thing.
Yes.
If it really helps, if you try to mix data protection and IT security together, because in most of the cases, the goals, or the ultimate goals, are very similar, at least. So in order to avoid to end up in the end of the corridor, as I said, or as Radu said, in the basement, then if you feel that that's a real threat, then you should try to, you know, squeeze in with the IT security issues, because that's really, it's easier to sell to the management than, for example, the core GDPR requirements.
Funny, no.
Okay, so I have a question here, and it's also about management support. So when GDPR came into force, it was a hot topic, and probably I expect management was more interested to support it. Now, 2 years of war with GDPR, let's say, people start getting tired of it. Do you see any change in management support over these 2 years, so from the beginning to now? And do you see any change if any new fines appear in the market? So how does it go? Is it like stable? Does it go down, or maybe it goes up occasionally?
May I quickly share my experience? Basically, there are two kind of trends. We've seen smaller organizations have a high interest at the beginning because the fines look really scary. And then that interest completely dissipated in the last 2 years. Or on the contrary, we've seen, and generally medium to large organizations, they tend to, from a formal type of support, okay, we have to do this task, so let's take it off, to more engagement in this whole topic. Because as Balin said, if you mix it with security, if your business is data driven and not brick and mortar, then you understand, as a manager, you will understand the value of data and data protection as a consequence. And we've seen organizations where the management has set up data stewardship committees, basically taking responsible persons from several departments that have anything to do with data assets and trying to create a data management strategy for the organization. So in general, where data really matters to the strategy, to the future of the company, we've seen an increased involvement from the management and an increased support to the DPO role. But again, this also depends on the qualities and the abilities of the DPO to sell him or herself as a function.
Thank you. Interesting topic indeed, and it's still hot, this one with the management. I think we will do in 2 years from now. We will do another 2 years assessment to see what will happen then. Moving on to the next questions, I would like to ask Angela about the privacy culture, creating a privacy culture versus mandatory enforcement. What is the road she picked and why?
Okay. I believe that for creating and building that privacy culture, there are some tips that I've collected by my experience. And the first one is definitely training. Training and never-ending training. I mean, among the employees and the management team of a company. Training does not mean learning the GDPR by heart. It's not necessary, only for the legals. But having a roadmap or a code of conduct in the organization, it means having SOPs, it means knowing the policies well, and the safety schedule, and to act upon them. Be ready to act upon them. It is very important that the employees know what to do, when to do it, to respond to data subjects upon their data subjects' rights, let's say. The second tip is awareness. The employees must have always in their minds the compliance with the GDPR, whatever they do, in anything that they do, especially in electronic communications, the e-shops and the company side, the newsletters, forms that collect personal data collecting forms, electronics or natural, and also they must always keep in mind the slight option of the legal consequences of a data breach, always in their mind. The third tip is cooperation among the teams and the departments of a company. And I believe the most significant tip is using tools. By tools, I mean a tool like Cipher, an electronic system or a platform that parameters the GDPR. These tools are the right tools, and it's the way to achieve compliance with GDPR, and also for consulting and monitoring services for the compliance at the hands of the DPO. Most of times, people forget about the surveillance cameras, CCTV cameras, but cameras are crucial, maybe one of the most crucial thing in privacy in general. I would like to take the opportunity to say that our company has developed a system of compliance for the CCTV cameras. It helps the DPO and the employees to comply. The EDPS strategy. So these were the tips. I think they make a culture for privacy in every organization. The EDPS strategy 2015-2019, leading by example, adopted at the beginning of the current EDPS mandate in 2015, sets out how they seek to promote a new culture of data protection in the European institutions and bodies, their vision to help the EU lead the global dialogue on data protection and privacy in the digital age, identifying cross-disciplinary policy solutions, and realizing the need for a consensus on the ethics of developing and deploying digital technologies. DPO is a part of that culture. In fact, one of the most functional and reliable parts. But he also is a part of accountability, as we all know, a demonstration of compliance. DPO has to have already a culture of privacy, him or herself. He or she has a legal background. I insist on that. I believe that strongly. Has the culture to operate with IT section, it's necessary, and the business section. We all know the 214 of 2016 guidelines. Relevant skills and expertise of DPO include, among others, ability to promote a data protection culture within the organization. A DPO is mandatory, for example, when the company or organization is a hospital processing large sets of sensitive data, a security company responsible for monitoring shopping centers and public spaces, or a small headhunting company that profiles individuals. And of course, a public body. In the public sector, where the enforcement is mandatory, this may be more difficult, but there is always a tension between the necessary proximity of the DPO to his or her organization, and on the other hand, the need to avoid conflicts of interest and ensure the DPO's actual independence in practice. We must never forget that public management values public interest, public needs, and political compromise. As a DPO in several bodies of public sector, my primary concern is the overall well-being of the organization that serves society. So the endeavor of a DPO is to balance the needs of business, interest groups, and individuals. GDPR, as well as other recent data protection instruments, including the Directive 680 of 2016 for data protection in the police and justice sectors, encourage companies and public sector agencies to take responsibility for setting its own risk-based approach tailored to specific circumstances. In fact, this is a new privacy culture. In the business world, this can clearly be a competitive advantage, having a privacy culture in the company as a precondition for the development of innovative processing operations. In the age of big data, state-of-the-art technology is necessary not only for private enterprises, but also for the law enforcement in the public sector. So to come back to DPO, even when the enforcement of appointing a DPO is mandatory due to public sector or large-scale processing, etc., it is crucial to believe that the culture of personal data protection is necessary. Otherwise, it will become just a formality, but it will be dangerous for the organization because of the risk that is out there. So we must, as a conclusion, I believe that we must never forget to build a data protection culture in an organization, even if a DPO is not mandatory, because people may come and then go, but principles stay for all the life circle of the company. After all, we have already seen in the media the impact that a data breach can have on the company's public reputation and consumer confidence, which can sometimes be more damaging than the fines themselves. That's all.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Yes, privacy culture is actually, I believe, the most important file we can have in a company towards building the privacy compliance program. I would like to address the question that were put in the Q&A section, also the answered one, because as I see, Balint has been busy answering them. I would like to address them to all the speakers. First one is from Adrian asking if the DPO role is even more difficult in these COVID times when private companies are struggling to survive. What do you think about this?
Me?
Rosanna,
I will.
like to...
Sorry.
Yes, I would like to answer, and Angela, after that, maybe you can answer as well. Well, in the very beginning of this COVID-19 situation, it was very difficult. After that, we managed to work in the new situation, and that's why we invented new ways. We found new ways to do our work and to do our duties. As I told you earlier, we organized a lot of webinars, which were remote, of course. And also we have a chat platform, and we chat with our clients all the time. So this COVID-19 situation, yes, in the very beginning was stressful, but now I think that all of us, the DPOs, and also our clients get used to it. So we managed to get through this situation, yes.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Ruslana. Do any of the other
Tatiana,
speakers want to respond, Angela?
yes, thank you. I would like to say 2 words for that. I agree with Ruslana. Yes, at first it was difficult, but I believe that, as we have seen in the tourism section, with health protocols, the new health protocols, it's easier for a company to adapt the health protocols and the data protection, the data protection protocols in the new COVID-19 age. If the company was already complied with GDPR, it's more easy. It's when a company has done all the circle of compliance with GDPR, it's easier for the company to adapt the new measures for the protocols and the new data protection measures, organizational and technical. So if you have to do it all over, it's more difficult if you do it from the start, the compliance.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Radu?
Well, I think the challenge during these times is twofold, if not threefold. Basically, first of all, yeah, the resources are no longer there. So we've seen many of the projects involving the DPO function put on hold or delayed. That's one thing. The second is that the whole lockdown that happened throughout the region and throughout the world actually meant a change in the way organizations work and a change in data flow. And this has led to security issues. This has led to different types of processing or different means of processing that were not employed by companies before, and which had to be taken into account, risks assessed and measures taken. And of course, this put a lot of pressure on organizations in terms of their data protection compliance, and ultimately on DPOs as well, because they have to work with the organizations to find the best solutions for these challenges. But we've seen, and actually what I'm surprised is that I've not seen a larger number of data breach reports to the authority, because I'm sure there were many data breaches during this period. Yeah, that must have represented a serious challenge to the professionals working in this field.
I think we will soon hear from the authority, because my personal opinion is that they are still assessing the data breaches, to say so. Thank you. And Balint, would you like to address to answer also here, because I know you already answered the question in writing, but can you?
Yeah, sure. I can't find the answer itself. So, well, I think that it again goes back or traces back to finding the right balance. So if the balance is a little bit, moves towards the business goals, then the DPO should also, how to say, lean about that or to that direction, but very carefully, so not to forget the original task, because it's clearly not a sustainable business model if you put compliance on hold, because it's difficult times, because eventually you will receive questions or later investigations or even later fines from the supervisory authority. You will start to lose customers because you are not complying with the GDPR. So I don't think that's the sustainable way of doing business. But in difficult times, sometimes difficult decisions are needed from the management, and I would put a full stop at the end of the sentence.
Thank you. Another question is, should a data request be valid if it comes over phone as a verbal request, taking in account Article 12 of the GDPR? What do you think?
If I may start with that because probably the questions stem.
Yes, I think it was with the data subject request.
Yeah, it will be valid. Of course, many controllers tend to overlook such requests or ignore them completely, thinking, yeah, the data subject cannot prove that he actually requested. But you never know when they are recording, or the idea would be not to think of how the other party can prove that they made a request, but rather to be compliant with it, because it will be simple for data subject who makes such a request over the phone to just put it in writing if no answer is received. Of course, the challenge there is to make sure or to verify the identity of the person, but there are ways to do that or to carry out that process. And yeah, one way, if verifying the identity is difficult, then in order to meet also this requirement of verifying the identity, the controller may request the person to address the question in writing together with some proof of identity or some other mean to verify identity. But anyway, the request is valid.
Anyone else wants to answer this question also?
Just one thought from my side. So just take an example, a company who is operating a call center. So if you call the call center and make a complaint just based on, consumer rights, then it's a valid complaint and the company has to process it and also has to respond to it, probably in writing. So I think the question has two sub-questions, and we address the first one. Yes, it's valid to receive a request, although you have to identify if you as a company has an account where you can ask people who dial in to verify themselves, then it's a little bit easier. Otherwise, it's a little bit challenging, but still doable. The other side of the question is how to respond to that one, and I think that was the ultimate question here, with referring to Article 12, subsection 1, is how to provide the information in the way which is described there. So it is concise but still detailed, etc. And I think that is almost impossible to do by oral means. So I would suggest that if you provide the short answer orally, then you should also follow up with the contact, if possible, in writing or in email or etc. Or if that's not possible, which I think I can't imagine a situation where you are processing personal data, but it's just the name of somebody and you don't know any contact particulars to that particular person. So even if that's the case, then I would suggest making a note, an internal note about that kind of discussions, just taking into consideration the accountability requirement in the GDPR, so that if that proceeds to a complaint to the supervisory authority, then you can show that internal note that this conversation has happened on this particular date and time. And I think that's the best way you can approach this question.
Thank you, Balint. Moving on to the next question, because we are on our last minutes. Very interesting one, actually. Did anyone of the panelists experience the data subject request from EU citizens related to a non-EU based company, for example, US-based one, which is processing personal data of EU citizens among other citizens from all over the world? And if so, how was it? How did you manage it with the competent authority for the complaint of the data subject against such a non-EU operator processor? Very interesting. As we know, data transfer is so interesting when it comes to the GDPR. Accountability is all that we have. So who would like to answer?
quickly respond to that. We've had such an experience. It's a client of ours that operates across various jurisdictions in the world, and the question was directed at the Romanian and Hong Kong operations of that particular client. But we never ended up at the authority, thankfully, so I can't really answer the second half of the question. The idea is that in terms of personal data referring to EU citizens, the same obligations apply throughout the world. Of course, the practicalities of it are still there to be sorted out when you actually have to make a complaint and enforce those obligations or rights of data subjects. But no experience with that one.
Okay, thank you, Radu. Anyone else? Okay, then there is another question. What about the time management of the DPO's activities? After the first 2 years, can you give us some good practice advice? Time management of DPO's activities sounds interesting. Who would like to answer it? Okay, I will pick one, Balint, because you're an outsourced DPO. I think it's wise to see your opinion about DPO's time management.
Yeah, I already started to respond in writing because I really enjoy this Q&A session. Anyway, I'm happy to cover it live. So I think external DPOs are better prepared to time management because usually they write timesheets and they provide these to their clients, or at least, you know, sort of how to say, delivery reports saying that, okay, in this month or in this period of time, I've responded to X number of X pieces of this subject, etc., etc., etc. Internal DPOs, it's a little bit harder to find this kind of PKI, so performance key indicators, but it's still not impossible. I don't really have experience. What I know, the DPOs, internal DPOs, they don't record their times. But certain DPOs are working either in specified platforms like Cypher or OneTrust or whatever, or these companies implemented this kind of GDPR processes into their, you know, this kind of corporate how to say, was that integration softwares like SAP or anything like that, and then they can pull you know, reports that how many processes they processed, etc., etc., how many time they spent on this or that particular matters, and then they can, you know, put together a case for themselves. But I think that the ultimate question will be, if it comes to internal DPOs, is again, if the you know, the managers or the management is happy, or if not happy, then how to say, satisfied with the quality of the, you know, service provided by the DPO.
Thank you, Balint. And now I think we have to draw the line and make the conclusions of this event because our time is up. I would like to make an exercise with the speakers. Let's all imagine a conclusions about how we think the GDPR will be 2 years from now. What would you expect to happen 2 years from now? Radu, would you like to start?
Okay, I'll go first then. Well, I do expect that awareness and general level of compliance will be increased, but probably even 2 years from now, the road will still be long. What I do expect in 2 years from now, this in Romania, is these 2 years were used by the authority to strengthen its structure, its administrative capabilities, let's say. I expect the next 2 years for the authority to actually show that capability and ability. So 2 years from now, we'll probably discuss some more complete decisions of the local authority, and this, in its turn, should generate more adherence and more compliance.
Thank you. Angela, would you like to be next?
Yes. First of all, I believe that in 2 years from now, I agree with Radu that the level will be higher, the awareness will be higher. I would like to believe that, and I see that things are going to this way. And I believe that every member state would set their own rules with new laws. And I believe that we will have new regulations in the EU legal system. And I believe that the knowledge of the natural persons of the data subject will be higher and will be more useful to them in the next 2 years. So I'm optimistic at this time.
Thank you. Ruslana, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Well, I hope, particularly for Bulgaria, I hope that Bulgarian people would put the matter, the data protection matter, higher, and it should be their priority. However, now we have a lot of other different problems. We have problems with our government. We have a lot of problems, and the data subjects, maybe their data privacy is not very important for them right now. And I hope in future, I hope that Bulgaria would be a place where not all of the problems, but most of the political problems will be solved. And we will have the time, we will have the strength to take care of our personal data, because it's very important nowadays. It's important for us, it's important for our children as well, because all these platforms like Facebook, like Instagrams, where we all the time upload photos of our children, maybe in future we'll have reflex on them. So yes, we should think deeper about data protection, about our rights, and I hope for my country, for Bulgaria, that it will be a priority in the future. That's all.
Thank you, Ruslana. And Balint?
Yeah, I think interesting times are coming. So just consider the, how to say, the never-ending story of the e-privacy regulation.
Yeah.
The investigations from various member states on EdTech and real-time bidding, which is a huge business and affecting basically anybody in the European Union who is using internet, either on mobile or a PC. So there will be a lot of questions, there will be a lot of issues, a lot of cases. So I think that DPOs should be prepared and should also, how to say, invest into improving their skills and professional experience, because it will be a challenging time from a professional point of view.
Thank you, Balint. As a conclusion, I personally hope that in 2 years from now, we will have national authorities doing more than now, guidelines and helping DPOs. And also, I would like to see that consistency mechanism between state members like really being used. That being said, I would like to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for sharing your experience with us. And To our community, thank you for attending, and we will see you at our next event in September. Until then, enjoy the summer and stay home, stay safe. Thank you, everyone. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
Big pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. See you in September.
Yes.